What's up, guys? We've got a huge update today for PR8, but just a quick heads up. I was told by Sam Hart, who is a pretty big contributor to the regular update data mines we get, that this update has been very convoluted and there may be some mistakes that need to be ironed out in the next few days. So my takes in this video will be based on the version of the data mine I'm using right now. And don't be surprised to see update videos if necessary. Aside from that, you know the drill. I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on the ships and equipment, and if you want access to any resource I use in the video, it should be in the description. Alright, let's get into it. First up is Gouden Leeuw. She's quite similar to Guam, having top-of-the-line anti-air performance, and despite being a heavy cruiser, she prefers to use large cruiser guns, as her skills will give her bonuses when she is using one. Actually, that was a lie. She can only equip the same arcing guns that the Deutschland class and P-class cruisers can. In other words, the purple AP-283 SKC, as well as the new gun that came out with this update. This means no Kronstadt gun, Azuma gun, Guam gun, or anything like that. Generally, I think the Rainbow Heavy Cruiser guns should end up being stronger for her than the large cruiser guns that she can equip. Where she slightly deviates from Guam is that she's actually not as tanky as the large cruisers we're used to, or Napoli from the last season, which is not to say that she's particularly squishy, gameplay-wise, but probably closer to someone like Plymouth than Guam. Additionally, where Guam has a pretty neat armor break debuff that has given her some niche uses in boss fights, being able to provide a permanent armor break from the start of the battle, Gouden Leeuw instead increases HE damage taken by 5% for 9 seconds, which is essentially permanent as well, as the airstrike which applies it has a base cooldown of around 10 seconds and is affected by her 181 reload stat. Although it's slightly worse than Guam's debuff in terms of applicability, it is a unique debuff as opposed to Guam's generic armor break that can be substituted by any other form of generic armor break, so I would value them about equally. And yeah, she has an airstrike barrage, but is it actually good though? When you look at the barrage numbers, just the total base damage numbers look quite impressive in comparison to the barrages of some of the other large cruisers, but we can't just stop there as they're technically airstrikes, which is going to come with pros and cons. Since these barrages scale off her aviation stat, of which she has 700, they scale quite a bit better than the typical firepower-based barrages from other large cruisers, as it's quite difficult to reach close to 700 firepower with just 300 base. But that is before you account for the fact that aviation scaling barrages should be affected by enemy anti-air, which would reduce their effectiveness by 70% or more in most situations. So yeah, when you look at these numbers, you can immediately just slash everything by about 75% to get a better comparison with other surface barrages. For example, looking at the total damage against light armor, it looks to be around 2,800, but after anti-air reduction, it's probably only about 700 damage. Aside from that, looking at the details about her barrages on this page, when a bomb barrage has no information about targeting or spread, you can assume that the bombs are dropped in a fixed pattern, like the carpet bombing of Taiho's bomb barrage or Graf Zeppelin's unique augment barrage. On the other hand, if it does have targeting but no spread, it's likely not from a plane but rather some kind of explosion. If it has both spread and splash, then it's likely an actual plane that functions like a dive bomber, which we can see in Shinano's bomb barrage, for example. And we can also confirm that this is the case in the shipyard simulation mode, where we can see the carpet bombing as well as the targeted orbital laser looking barrages, which is the targeted barrage that doesn't have a spread value. One last thing I should mention is that she also has a minor heal for allied ships, and it's the good kind of targeting, aka for the ship that needs it most, but it only procs up to 2 times a battle, so even though the targeted healing has the same healing strength per activation as Provincians can proc every 10 seconds in ideal conditions, which ends up doing a lot more. So while the heal is nice to have, it's definitely not something that she relies upon to be useful. Kinda similar to Prince Rupee's heal. In summary, Gouden Leeuw should be another exceptional anti-air platform that also brings a respectable amount of damage, especially in campaign where she can make use of her bombs' AoE damage to gain an advantage over other Vanguard barrages. If you're looking for an upgrade for your boss fleets, she could see some use in HE fleets that also need anti-air for some reason, which is probably going to be extremely uncommon. In that case, you'd be probably better off investing in Trafalgar or something if you haven't already, but if you have good taste, you'll ult her and raise her to 125 anyway. As I'm recording this, we're almost at the 6-minute mark, and I just realized I really should make a separate video for every ship to form more engagement, but whatever. Next up is Mecklenburg, who immediately stands out with her crazy base stats. Another thing that caught my attention is just how much of her kit is tied to being sortied with Bismarck Sway, not unlike Nakimov's affinity to Soyuz. Honestly, her kit is quite straightforward. I don't think there's much to explain about her dealing more damage against an enemy she marks, or her debuff being stronger against an enemy that is being affected by Bismarck's black hole. She has exactly 1 less point of reload than Bismarck Sway, and when sortied together gains the same 15% reload bonus as Bismarck, so it'll be trivially easy to sync their attacks together. I can't help but feel that Bismarck's faction buff should have had 15% reload, which would have been much more impactful as a faction buff and would have made Mecklenburg less reliant on Bismarck as well. Her kit has a slight skew toward heavy armor, both in terms of her skill buff and barrage modifiers. I think she'll be at least as strong, if not stronger than Musashi against heavy, while not having an annoying restriction on her gun choices. Since Musashi doesn't have any specific synergy with Shinano and Amagi, I could see Mecklenburg being better with them than Musashi in a heavy armor bossing fleet. But that is pretty much already the case with Lion and Alsace anyway. At this point, Musashi is pretty much relegated to being a campaign specialist, like Raffaello, as there are now so many better options than Musashi against heavy armor. Next time a heavy armor boss rolls around, battleships will be much more competitive with carriers. I won't go as far as to say that battleships will be better, but it was a wash before Lion and Mecklenburg, and in all likelihood, it won't be that much of a difference anymore. But then again, we could get a new UR carrier before then to swing things the other way. While Mecklenburg is slightly skewed toward heavy, Bismarck Sway is the opposite and skewed toward light armor, meaning that this duo won't specialize against a particular armor type, but instead be a strong option against any single target enemy you run into. This duo would likely not fall behind the duel of Lion and Alsace against light armor, or Shinano and Amagi against heavy, but if they had been on the same page, then they might have been the undisputed best duo against the single armor type instead. The fact that they don't specialize against a particular armor type isn't a strictly good or bad thing. Players who love using Ironblood ships can use Ironblood-centric compositions featuring these two and Z52 to great success, and players who don't want to use Ironblood compositions can use a myriad of other compositions with similar success, so I personally see it as a win-win, but there are players who prefer certain factions to specialize in certain areas. Mecklenburg's barrages are not particularly strong compared to other UR battleships, which is fine since her base stats and buffs are so much higher. She will easily be competitive with the likes of Lion and Alsace, and the fact that she deals more damage with her guns than barrages means that she'll age better as we get even stronger guns in the future. As is the case with Lion and Alsace, she can hold up to 2 salvos, which will be very convenient. I wonder if we can start a movement to get the same perk for previous UR battleships as well, as I don't really see a reason for them to get shafted just because they came out earlier. This new bonus reminds me of the max limit break bonuses destroyers got a while back for the class as a whole to catch up with the other Vanguard classes. The extra salvo capacity makes battleships as easy to use as carriers now, and should be applied to the entire class as a whole. If you have any sort of sway, please let Manju know they need to add this, at least to the other UR battleships, if not battleships as a whole. One last thing. She has a damage reduction skill, which might come in handy in PvP, especially when combined with Seidlitz, but generally in bossing, You'll want to use her as the flagship not only to take advantage of Plymouth's debuff for her high personal damage, but also because you'll want to use Bismarck's Way in the top position to trigger Z52's debuff before Mecklenburg fires. And that is pretty much it for Mecklenburg. Next up, we move on to the PRs. Dmitry Donskoy is pretty much just a stat stick, in the same vein as Neptune with her unique augment and Bayard. She has a 5% damage increase for AP damage only, which I don't think is quite enough to make her a viable choice even in fleets that have a ton of AP damage. 10% might have pushed it over the edge and made her a solid option, but 5% doesn't really excite me. Other than that, she has defensive skills that don't proc when she's the tank, which makes her less viable as a tank compared to Neptune and Bayard, which is another point against her. Damage-wise, just eyeballing her stats, buffs, and barrages, I would place her slightly below Bayard, but well above Neptune. Take that with a mountain of salt, though, as I haven't done a single calc, and I'll definitely test her when I have her maxed out. Next up is Vittorio Cuniberti. She is also just a stat stick despite having a smokescreen, because for some reason her smokescreen only affects herself. I don't know why that is the case, but it means she has literally zero utility and provides only damage and nothing else. Damage-wise, she has an average loadout for an SSR, and effectively 45% torpedo stat buff, as it's active whenever she deals torpedo damage, but on the firepower end, the buff is more conditional. Despite the big torpedo buff though, her base stats are not particularly high, and her max limit break perk don't help her torpedoes in any way, so she doesn't look super promising. She feels to me like just another Halford. Very cute, but that's about where it ends. Finally, we have Kansas, who is our first battleship with 4 main gun mounts. This will be a benefit in campaign as her damage is more spread out, and a detriment against single bosses that have a time limit, because it's going to take even more time for her entire salvo to be done firing. She has a pretty powerful barrage, which is very spread out, so she will definitely be a powerful campaign battleship for an SSR, for what that's worth. But with the 4 volleys on her main gun and her relatively low reload stat, she won't be doing too much in solo boss fights. Also, looking at her barrage in the shipyard simulation, I feel like it's kind of lame actually that it uses default AP and HE shells and not any kind of special effects. And that's pretty much it for the new PR ships. Next, let's take a look at the equipment. The Rainbow gun this time around is a battleship gun. If you've seen my in-depth guide on battleship guns, you should probably be roughly aware of the things I'm going to say about the gun. If you haven't, I would recommend giving that a watch after so you can evaluate them for yourself going forward. Comparing it to the other strong AP battleship guns, it stands out in a few different ways. First is its slightly but very relevant shorter cooldown. It's also got the best performance against heavy armor for the guns within the 18 to 20 seconds cooldown range. The base cooldown of 23 seconds here doesn't take into account the reload of the ship it will be equipped to, so in practice its cooldown is closer to 18 seconds, while the 460 would be more like 25 seconds or so. And despite it having 4 barrels, its spread is very tight and doesn't need any spread reduction to be accurate against a stationary target. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the increased shell velocity of some of the other guns, like the Champagne gun, but that's not super important. Now, its cooldown, which is slightly lower than that of even the Flandre gun, will make it ideal for ships that don't naturally have the reload to squeeze in a final salvo in a timed fight with a gun that has a slightly longer 24-second base cooldown. Some relevant examples of this are Soyuz in her carrier buffing mode without her reload buff, Raffaello, and Kearsarge. And also Mecklenburg if you don't use her with Bismarck's Way and she doesn't get the reload buff. Although Kearsarge doesn't gain her 10% firepower buff when using this gun, as it's neither USS nor Russian, the trade-off is that you don't have to bring an autoloader and can instead use a shell in her auxiliary slot, likely leading to an overall better performance against medium armor than something like the Soyuz gun, which is Russian and does benefit from the firepower bonus. Against heavy armor, it's going to be the default choice as the 460 is too slow to be used outside of specific setups, which are typically going to be worse with the addition of this gun. And then its only competitor around its cooldown is the Champagne gun, which deals less damage on a per salvo basis than the Quad 305, on top of its longer cooldown. While this gun will see a lot of use as people complete it, the good news is that you probably won't be needing more than 3 of them, and even 2 is enough for 99.9% of scenarios. You'll probably want 2 just to run the same gun on Bismarck's Way and Mecklenburg, but whether a full battleship composition will be the optimal setup for heavy armor enemies remains to be seen. Cooldown aside, its medium damage isn't as good relative to its peers as its heavy damage. On a per salvo basis, it deals approximately the same damage as the gold Marco Polo gun from PR4, without accounting for the better ballistics and higher firepower, so it should be weaker than the Soyuz and Raffaello guns if you don't specifically need its lower cooldown. Once again, 2 of these guns will be fine, because carriers still nuke the living crap out of heavy armor, and we don't know what the future holds, so by the time you get 2, maybe a rainbow-aimed torpedo bomber or skip bomber will have come out, and carriers will be on top yet again by a wide margin. There's also the fact that battleships don't need to have 2 guns equipped, unlike LA9 for carriers, so if you didn't get enough LA9s from last year, here's your chance to get a couple more after you finish a couple copies of the new gun. Next up is a new set of torpedoes. And yeah, I really need to make the torpedo guide already. They don't fan out, but instead fire in parallel, as you can see in the clip here. Apparently they're homing, but the strength is so little that it doesn't really make a difference. Their damage is a little lower than the normal quad mags, but I guess that is because its pattern might be considered an upgrade by whoever designed them, so the damage is lower to compensate, but I don't really rate them judging from their performance here. And I'm not talking about their damage, but their homing capability. Next up is the prototype 406 Mark VII AP version. This one just has nothing going for it over the Musashi gun, being a slight downgrade against medium armor and a big downgrade against heavy. So yeah, not much else to say. Maybe you can use it on Kearsarge for the same use cases as the Musashi gun, but I don't know if it's worth it. Next up is the new AP Light Cruiser gun. It does nothing special. Just save your gold and skip it. Next up is the new anti-air gun. It has solid damage, but it gives your anti-air range pretty hard, having only 25 range, so I don't think it's worth using at all given the amount of options we have now. The final gun is a large cruiser gun that can be equipped on Gouden Leeuw, as well as some of the other heavy cruisers, that can equip the old purple 283 SKC, like Prinz Heinrich, Friedrich Karl, and so on. The gun is slightly better than the Azuma gun, both in terms of DPS, and also having slightly bigger AoE, but I'm not 100% sure it's better than the Unzen gun, even with the buffs she gets from using it. The older large cruisers that used the Azuma gun before, for example Azuma herself, would benefit from using this new gun over the Azuma gun. But once again, Gouden Leeuw cannot use the large cruiser guns, aside from the 283mm ones. Also, against medium armor, Gouden Leeuw will have no choice but to use the Hindenburg gun, as the purple 283 SKC is a little bit too weak. And that is pretty much it for the new research stuff. I'll also quickly talk about Shoukaku's unique augment. Shoukaku has always had a similar use case to Centaur, more so than the other IJN carrier duos. Rather than using her with Zuikaku for the large aviation buffs for both sisters, she was often used as a damage buffer who was also IGN to receive Shinano's buffs. Her augment has made it so that she not only doesn't need Zuikaku anymore to get 30% aviation, but also gains 20% accuracy on top of that. This is already one of probably the strongest self-buffs for a carrier, and she also got some extra efficiency slapped onto her dive bombers and torpedo bombers as well. On top of that, the augment itself also gives 20 reload, which will help her strike before other carriers to apply her buff, as she's on the slow side without it. With all these damage buffs, totaling up to a damage increase of somewhere between 40 to 50%, is it enough to make her competitive with the Rainbow IJN carriers? I don't think so. Even Haku, who is the weakest of the three, has her own debuff on her airstrike, on top of dealing more damage still than Shoukaku even after the augment, so there's no reason to use her over the 3 Rainbow ships. However, She is easily stronger than most of the other SSR carriers in the game, including ones like Taiho with her unique augment, and most of the USS carriers. The augment is strong, and I do have high hopes for her, that she might find herself in a situation like Centaur or Richelieu, where she can one-shot meta bosses because she's just strong enough. But realistically, she's just not got the damage to be at the level of even Haku. Still, I'll welcome any reason to use such a beautiful ship, and I hope that some of my other favorite carriers like Kaga and XX can get similarly powerful and no-nonsense augments in the future. My overall impression of this batch of PR ships is that the designs are all pretty amazing, especially the two URs who fit my tastes to a T. But gameplay-wise, new PR seasons no longer feel special like they used to. To me, this is just another event. Back in Series 2 and 4, I won't mention 3 because of the Drake incident, rainbow ships were very rare, so DRs represented a significant increase in power level compared to non-research ships. At this point, there are regular events with 2 ultra rares, and the research ships are typically only about equal in strength, yet take months to develop, so the payoff isn't quite there. While Mecklenburg is definitely strong, she's still about as strong as Lion and Alsace, not much more, and Gouden Leeuw isn't anything we haven't seen before. And as for the gold ships, back in the days when oil costs were relevant, PR ships came with an upcharge in oil costs, but were also the strongest among the SSR ships. Nowadays, oil cost is negligible, and the PR ships in the last couple batches have been approximately on par with decent to good event SSRs. Donskoy doesn't seem much better than the likes of Provincian or Watarase, and Kuniberti likely won't make it onto my tier list altogether, just like Halford. Ships like Dyson and Kansas are not much different from Ori or Kazan either. I hope that, moving forward, they'll try something new to bring back some of that PR magic and excitement, perhaps by increasing the number of DRs, or taking bigger risks with the PRs rather than making them stat sticks. Although I think Kansas being the first ship with 4 main gun mounts is pretty neat. And as for the tier list, I will likely be making videos going over each one, highlighting the changes from last year to now, and making all the changes I deem necessary. Please look forward to that. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you found it informative. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.